I didn't know a person could bleed and still be invisible at the same time. They tell you that near-death moments arrive with clarity, bright lights, sudden truth, some dramatic realization that changes everything in an instant. That isn't how it happened for me. For me, it arrived quietly. In a white room that smelled like antiseptic. With machines humming like they were bored of keeping me alive. With my phone lying face down on a plastic hospital table, untouched for hours. I was bleeding. Internally. Externally. Emotionally, though I wouldn't have had the strength to name that yet. Somewhere outside that room, life was continuing without me. Decisions were being made. Roles were being reassigned. And I had no idea that while I lay there weak, stitched, and sedated, my place in my own family was already being filled. What happens when you survive something that should have killed you, only to realize the real betrayal happened while you were still breathing? What do you do when love doesn't leave loudly, but replaces you quietly? Hi. I'm Elena. And this is my story. The first thing I felt wasn't pain. It was weight. A heavy, dragging pressure in my lower abdomen, like my body was being pulled downward by something invisible. When I tried to move, my muscles didn't respond the way I expected them to. My fingers twitched. That was it. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white. Too white. The kind of white that hums. The kind that makes time stretch and flatten until you can't tell how long you've been staring at the same spot. There was a faint beeping somewhere to my left, slow and steady, like a reminder rather than a warning. I swallowed. My throat burned. Hello? I croaked, surprised by how small my voice sounded. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Hello? Footsteps approached. A nurse appeared at my side, her face calm, practiced, kind in that professional way that doesn't invite too many questions. You're awake, she said gently. That's good. I wanted to ask what happened, but the words tangled in my mouth. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I remembered rain. Headlights. A sudden scream, maybe mine, maybe not. Then nothing. What about my son? I asked, panic cutting through the fog. Is he okay? He's fine, she said quickly. He wasn't in the car. Relief washed through me so fast it made me dizzy. And my husband? I asked. Has he been here? The nurse paused. Just for a fraction of a second. But when you're lying flat, helpless, bleeding through layers of gauze and sheets, you notice pauses. They echo. He stepped out, she said. You lost a lot of blood. We needed to stabilize you first. How long? I whispered. She checked the monitor. You've been here since early morning. Early morning. I turned my head slowly toward the plastic table beside the bed. My phone lay there, screen dark. No missed calls lighting it up. No messages waiting. That didn't make sense. My husband never missed a call. Not when it came to control. Not when it came to appearances. Especially not when it involved our son. My stomach tightened. Can I see him? I asked. She hesitated again. This time longer. I'll let him know you're awake, she said carefully. After she left, the room felt colder. I stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe through the dull ache spreading through my body. Tubes snaked from my arms. Bandages wrapped around my waist. I could feel something wet beneath me, blood, I realized distantly. I was bleeding. Still. And I was alone. Minutes passed. Then more. Time stretched thin. No footsteps. No door opening. No familiar voice saying my name. I turned my head again and picked up my phone with shaking fingers. 1% battery. No notifications. No messages. No missed calls. That was when the thought surfaced. not as panic, but as something quieter and more dangerous. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't worried. And somewhere, deep in my chest, something shifted, not breaking, not yet. But going very, very still. Because if he wasn't here, then where was he? Time doesn't move normally in a hospital room. It stretches. Folds back on itself. Becomes something thick and slow, like syrup you're trapped inside. I watched the clock on the wall tick forward in uneven jumps. The second hand hesitated, then lurched ahead, as if even it resented being there. Every few minutes, a nurse came in to check my vitals, adjust a drip, ask me to rate my pain on a scale that felt meaningless. I answered automatically. Numbers were easier than feelings. Still, no sign of my husband. At first, I excused it. That's what love teaches you to do when it's been mixed with dependence. He must be with our son, I told myself. He must be arranging things. He must be overwhelmed. But excuses have a shelf life. And mine were expiring fast. I tried calling him. The phone buzzed weakly in my hand, then went silent. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't know what I would say without sounding afraid. The nurse returned with a small paper cup of water and helped me sit up just enough to sip it. The movement sent a sharp pain through my side, stealing my breath. I gasped despite myself. Easy, she said softly. You had internal bleeding. You're lucky. Lucky. The word landed wrong. Has my husband asked about me? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She glanced down at her clipboard. He was informed of your condition earlier. That's not what I asked, I said quietly. She met my eyes this time. There it was again, that pause. That careful rearranging of words before they left her mouth. He checked in this morning, she said. Before the surgery. And after? Her lips pressed together. He hasn't been back yet. The silence that followed felt louder than any alarm. I nodded, as if that answer satisfied me. As if something inside me hadn't started calculating. Measuring. Not accusing yet, just noticing. After she left, I lay back against the pillow and stared at the pale curtain separating me from the next bed. I could hear another woman coughing softly. Somewhere down the hall, a child cried. Life, pain, survival, all happening in parallel lanes that didn't intersect. My phone vibrated suddenly, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. A message. Not from him. From my sister-in-law. How are you feeling? I stared at the screen, my heart thudding. She never texted me directly. Not unless there was a birthday reminder or some polite obligation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I just woke up. Where is he? I typed. The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. He said you were stable, she replied. I thought you knew. Knew what? My chest tightened. I didn't ask. I didn't want to sound dramatic. I didn't want to reveal how alone I was in that moment. I just wrote back. Can you bring my son later? I want to see him. The response came slower this time. We'll see how you're feeling, she said. He's settled right now. Settled. That word stayed with me long after the screen went dark again. Settled where? I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me in waves. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. Every breath felt deliberate, like something I had to consciously choose. I drifted in and out of sleep, each time waking with the same thought pressing at the edge of my mind. This isn't normal. At some point, another nurse came in to adjust my 4. She was younger, less guarded. She smiled at me, then glanced toward the door as if expecting someone. Your family will be allowed in soon, she said. Once visiting hours start again. My husband? I asked. She nodded. And, whoever's with him. I frowned. With him? She looked at me, confused. Yes. The woman who was here earlier. The words landed softly. Almost kindly. But inside me, something dropped. There was another woman? I asked. She blinked, clearly realizing too late that she'd said something she shouldn't have. Oh, maybe I'm mistaken. I just assumed. Assumed what? My voice shook despite my effort to steady it. She hesitated, then shook her head. I'll check your chart. And just like that, she left the room. I lay there, staring at the door she'd walked through. Another woman. Not a doctor. Not a nurse. Someone who belonged. I tried to picture it. Him standing at the foot of my bed earlier, before I woke up. Him explaining. Him introducing. The image didn't make sense yet. It floated around my mind without shape, without context. But the absence, that had weight. That had form. His absence wasn't empty. It was filled with something else. And I was still bleeding. Still weak. Still trapped in a bed I couldn't leave. While somewhere outside this room, my place was being occupied. And I hadn't even been conscious enough to object. The doctor came in just after noon. He was tall, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm that comes from having delivered bad news so many times it no longer rattles him. He introduced himself, explained the injuries in measured language, spoke about blood loss and internal trauma like he was listing items on a shelf. I listened. I nodded. I asked the right questions. But I wasn't really there. Because every few sentences, his eyes drifted, not to the door, not to the chart, but to the empty chair beside my bed. The one meant for someone who wasn't showing up. You're fortunate, he said. You came in just in time. I swallowed. I don't remember much. That's normal, he replied. Shock does that. He paused, then added casually, your family seemed very concerned earlier. Family. Plural. Something tightened in my chest. My husband? I asked. Yes, he said. Anne. He stopped himself. It was subtle. Almost polite. But again, pauses echo when you're paying attention. And who? I asked softly. He cleared his throat. There was another woman with him when you arrived. She stayed through most of the morning. Another woman. Not a visitor. Not a colleague. Not a relative. She seemed familiar, he continued, as if trying to justify the assumption even to himself. Comfortable. She spoke about your son. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from injury this time, but from something colder. My son? I repeated. Yes, he said. She asked if he'd been notified. Wanted to make sure he was okay. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the sheets, grounding myself in the rough fabric beneath my fingers. And my husband? I asked. What did he say? The doctor hesitated, then offered a careful smile. He said everything was being handled. Handled. By who? The doctor finished his update, reminded me to rest, and left. As the door closed behind him, the silence rushed in like water through a crack. Another woman. With him. Talking about my son. The image I'd been avoiding sharpened against my will. Her hand on his arm. Her voice lowered in concern. The way she must have leaned in when he explained, when he reframed my absence as something manageable. Temporary. Inconvenient. I pressed my lips together, forcing back the rising panic. I couldn't afford it. My body was already struggling. My mind couldn't collapse too. I reached for my phone again and scrolled through my messages. Still nothing from him. No explanation. No reassurance. No apology for not being there when I woke up bleeding. Instead, a new message appeared. From my mother-in-law. Don't worry. Everything is under control. I stared at the words until they blurred. I typed back slowly, deliberately. Where's my son? The response came quickly. He's fine. He's being taken care of. Not by me. I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the ceiling again and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. My thoughts felt heavy, like they were moving through mud. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That there had to be an explanation. That families rally in crises. That sometimes people step in without meaning to step over. But there was a difference between help and replacement. And deep down, beneath the pain and the fog and the fear, I felt it. Something had slipped while I was unconscious. Not loudly. Not violently. Just quietly enough that everyone else seemed to accept it as normal. Except me. And I was starting to understand that waking up hadn't just brought me back to consciousness. It had dropped me into the middle of a story that had already been unfolding without my consent. A story where my role was being rewritten. And no one had bothered to ask if I agreed. They brought my phone charger in the late afternoon, coiled neatly like it had been prepared ahead of time. I thanked the nurse, even smiled, because that's what women do when they're trying not to fall apart in public spaces. Once my phone had enough power to stay alive, I stared at it for a long time before unlocking the screen. I hadn't spoken to my son yet. Not properly. Not with my voice. I was afraid of what I might hear. Still, I pressed his contact and started a video call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice. Then his face filled the screen. "Mommy," he said, bright and immediate, like the word had been waiting in him all day. The sound of his voice loosened something tight in my chest. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "Hi, baby," I said, my voice thin but steady. "I missed you." He smiled, wide and gap-toothed, then tilted the phone slightly as if someone off-camera had said something to him. "Say hi properly," a woman's voice prompted gently. I froze. "Hi, Mommy," he repeated, obediently this time. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Curious. Normal. He frowned a little, thinking. "That's the lady who's helping Daddy." Helping. The word settled between us like dust. "What kind of helping?" I asked. He shrugged, the way children do when something feels obvious to them. "She makes my lunch. And she stays when Daddy works late." My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I forced myself to breathe. "And where are you right now?" I asked. "At home," he said. Then, proudly, "in the big room. She sleeps there sometimes so I don't get scared." The big room. My room. I felt dizzy. The edges of the screen blurred, but I kept my smile in place like it was armor. "That's nice," I said softly. "Is Daddy there?" He shook his head. "No. He said he had to talk to people. But she's here." The phone shifted again. For a second, I saw her. She was younger than I expected. Or maybe not younger, just lighter. Loose hair. Soft sweater. Comfortable in a way that takes time. She didn't smile when she noticed me on the screen. She just adjusted the phone, efficient, practiced. "She's still recovering," she said to my son. "We don't want to make Mommy tired." The way she said Mommy felt rehearsed. Careful. Like a word she'd practiced saying in the mirror. "I'll talk to you later, okay?" she added, already pulling the phone away. "Wait," I said, panic slicing through my voice. "Just one more minute." My son looked back at the screen, his smile dimming slightly as if he sensed the shift. "I love you," I said quickly. "I'll see you soon." "I love you too," he said. The call ended. I stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. Pale. Eyes too big for my face. Bandages visible at the edge of the frame. Another woman was putting my son to bed. Another woman was sleeping in my room. Another woman was deciding when I was allowed to speak to my own child. And everyone else seemed to think that was reasonable. I didn't cry then. I couldn't afford to. My body was already fragile, my blood pressure monitored closely. I swallowed the grief down until it burned. I told myself I needed rest. That shock was playing tricks on my mind. That none of this could be as bad as it felt. But even as I closed my eyes, one thought stayed awake. She wasn't visiting. She wasn't helping temporarily. She was already acting like she belonged. And the most terrifying part wasn't that she was there. It was that my son didn't sound surprised at all. That night, I convinced myself it was nothing. That's the lie we reach for when the truth is still too sharp to hold barehanded. We wrap it in reason. In kindness. In benefit of the doubt. I told myself this woman was temporary. A stopgap. A well-meaning presence filling in the cracks while I was broken open on a hospital bed. People help in crises, I reminded myself. Families lean in. Lines blur when someone nearly dies. I repeated it until it almost sounded believable. The lights were dimmed around 10. The ward quieted in the way hospitals do, never silent, just subdued. I lay awake listening to the soft rhythm of machines and the distant squeak of shoes in the hallway. My body ached in dull, persistent waves. Every shift of my weight reminded me how close I'd come to not waking up at all. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt erased. Sometime after midnight, I checked my phone again. Still nothing from my husband. No apology. No explanation. No, I'm sorry I wasn't there when you woke up bleeding. I opened my email out of habit, expecting nothing. There it was. A message from my son's school. Dear parent. We wanted to confirm the updated emergency contact details we received this morning. My fingers trembled as I opened it. They thanked us for the prompt communication. For ensuring continuity. For making sure the new caregiver was fully informed about pickup protocols and medical notes. New caregiver. I scrolled down, my breath shallow. My name wasn't listed. Not as primary. Not as secondary. It was her. I stared at the screen until the words stopped making sense. When did this happen? Not today. The timestamp said morning. Early morning. Before surgery. Before I woke up. Before I could object. I felt something inside me finally crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to let the truth seep through. This wasn't help. This was replacement. I forwarded the email to myself. Took screenshots. Saved everything in a folder I titled Medical. Neutral. Unassuming. Like I didn't already know I was documenting the dismantling of my life. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She noticed my tears then, silent, steady, slipping down the sides of my face. Pain? She asked gently. I shook my head. Shock, she said, nodding like she understood. Maybe she did. Or maybe she didn't need to. Women learn early how to cry without asking for rescue. When she left, I wiped my face and stared at the ceiling again. I told myself I'd talk to him tomorrow. That I'd ask calmly. That there would be an explanation that made sense of all this. That no one could really think a mother could be replaced so easily. But deep down, beneath the denial and the fatigue, something else was growing. Not rage. Not despair. Awareness. And awareness has weight. It settles in your chest and refuses to be ignored. I didn't sleep much after that. Because somewhere between the beeping machines and the quiet footsteps in the hall, I realized the lie I'd been telling myself wasn't meant to protect him. It was meant to protect me from admitting that while I was fighting to live, someone else had been busy rewriting my place in my own family. And tomorrow, I would stop pretending not to see it. Morning came in thin, gray light that slipped through the narrow window like it was unsure it belonged there. I woke with my body stiff and sore, my mouth dry, my head heavy with the kind of exhaustion sleep doesn't touch. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then the ache in my side reminded me. Hospital. Blood. Silence. A nurse helped me sit up so I could eat a few bites of toast. I managed to before nausea rolled in and I had to stop. She didn't push it. She just smiled, adjusted my blanket, and told me the doctor would be in soon to discuss discharge planning. Discharge. The word felt unreal. Like they were talking about someone else. Someone whose life hadn't just been quietly dismantled. When the doctor arrived, he spoke in the same calm, careful tone. My injuries were serious, but I was stable. I'd need rest. Follow-ups. Help at home. Your husband will need to be attentive, he said. You shouldn't be alone for the first few weeks. I nodded. He's already arranged support, the doctor continued, glancing at the chart. So that part is covered. Support. Again, that word. What kind of support? I asked. He looked surprised. The caregiver listed on your forms. My stomach dropped. What forms? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned the clipboard toward me. It was routine paperwork, emergency contacts, post-discharge instructions, authorized caregivers. And there it was. Not my name. Hers. Listed as the primary caregiver. My husband's handwriting filled the margins. Confident. Decisive. Familiar. She's been very involved, the doctor said. Asked thoughtful questions. Made sure we knew about your son's schedule. I couldn't speak. Because the truth was sitting right there in black ink. This wasn't chaos. This was planning. These were completed yesterday, the doctor added. Before surgery. Before I woke up. Before I could say no. My hands shook as I pushed the clipboard back toward him. I need a moment, I said. He nodded, sensing something he didn't have context for, and left the room. I stared at the door long after it closed. He had changed my emergency contact. Changed my caregiver. Updated school records. Possibly more. All while I lay unconscious, bleeding, unable to advocate for myself. I reached for my phone again and began scrolling, slowly, methodically. Bank alerts. Calendar entries. Emails I hadn't noticed before. There were small things. Subtle things. A grocery delivery receipt I didn't recognize. A calendar reminder canceled without my input. A shared account password reset notification from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. This hadn't started with the accident. The accident had just given him an opening. I forwarded every suspicious email to myself. Took screenshots. Not because I had a plan yet, but because something inside me understood that clarity was coming. And when it did, I would need proof. Paper doesn't lie. People do. A social worker stopped by later that morning. She spoke kindly, asked about my support system, my recovery plan. I'm concerned, I said carefully. There have been changes made without my consent. She looked up sharply. What kind of changes? I told her. Not everything. Just enough. She listened. Took notes. Asked if I felt safe. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. She nodded. You have the right to revise any authorization at any time, she said. Including caregivers and emergency contacts. The words settled in my chest like a lifeline. When she left, I lay back against the pillows, my heart racing, not with fear this time, but with something steadier. Information. Power. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But I was done pretending this was accidental. Because while I had been bleeding, he had been preparing. And now that I could see it clearly, I knew one thing for certain. I would not let my life be rewritten on paper without my signature ever again. By the time evening came, I had learned something important about myself. I was capable of being very quiet. Not the stunned silence of shock. Not the obedient quiet I'd learned in arguments over the years. This was different. This was intentional. Chosen. A kind of stillness that let me watch without being noticed. When my husband finally came to the hospital, it was almost dark. I heard his voice before I saw him, low, confident, familiar in a way that no longer felt comforting. He was laughing softly with someone outside the room. A private sound. An inside joke. Then he walked in alone. "There you are," he said, smiling like he'd just stepped out for coffee, not disappeared while I was bleeding internally. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, careful not to disturb the tubes. "You scared us." "Us." I looked at him. Really looked. His hair was neat. His shirt clean. He didn't look like a man who'd spent the day pacing a hospital corridor, fearing for his wife's life. He looked composed. Prepared. "I scared you?" I asked softly. He nodded. "The accident. It was a lot. I had to make sure everything was handled." Handled. There it was again. I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't ask why my name had been erased from paperwork like a pencil mark smudged clean. I just nodded. "How's our son?" I asked. "He's fine," he said quickly. "Settled. He's got stability right now." Stability. Another word that didn't belong to me anymore. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad." He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to read something. Maybe he expected tears. Accusations. Gratitude. I gave him none of it. "I'll be discharged soon," I added. "The social worker said I can update my forms." His smile flickered. Just briefly. "Of course," he said. "We'll do whatever's best for everyone." Everyone but me, I thought. He stayed for less than 20 minutes. Talked about logistics. About work. About how stressful the day had been for him. He never apologized for not being there when I woke up. Never explained the other woman. Never said her name. When he left, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt informed. Later that night, I overheard him on the phone in the hallway while a nurse helped me walk a few steps with a frame. His voice was gentle. Reassuring. "No, she doesn't know everything," he said quietly. "She's tired. Confused. We'll take it slow." A pause. "Yes. I know. You've done great." My grip tightened on the metal frame. "You've done great." He was thanking her. Not for helping. For replacing. I didn't confront him when he came back in. I didn't let my anger show. I thanked the nurse, eased back into bed, and closed my eyes like I was drifting off. But inside, something had fully solidified. I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I was gathering information. Because the moment you stop asking questions out loud is often the moment you start finding answers on your own. And every answer I was uncovering told me the same thing. This wasn't about my recovery. It was about control. And I was done giving it to him without a fight he'd never hear coming. They discharged me 2 days later. I expected the moment to feel triumphant, like surviving meant I had won something. Instead, it felt like being quietly escorted out of a place that had protected me from seeing too much too soon. The nurse helped me into a wheelchair, my body still unsteady, my movements slow and careful. Every step reminded me that healing wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process. One I wasn't being given the time for. My husband met me at the entrance. He didn't bring flowers. Didn't look relieved. He looked efficient. Like this was another task checked off a list. "We'll go home," he said. "It's already set up." Set up. I didn't argue. I let him help me into the car, his hand firm on my elbow, guiding me like someone who knew exactly where I was supposed to go. The drive was quiet. Not awkward, just empty. He talked about traffic, about work schedules, about how things would be easier once I was settled. I stared out the window and let the city blur past, my thoughts staying stubbornly clear. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach tightened. My car wasn't there. Inside, the house smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Citrus cleaner instead of the lavender I liked. Shoes by the door that weren't mine. And neatness that felt curated, not lived in. She stepped out of the kitchen when she heard us. "Oh," she said softly, like she hadn't expected me yet. "You're home." I nodded. This was the woman who had been sleeping in my room. Feeding my son. Speaking for me while I was unconscious. She smiled politely. Respectfully. Like someone meeting a coworker, not the woman whose life she'd stepped into. "I made soup," she said. "The doctor said you'd need something light." My husband didn't introduce us. He didn't need to. She already belonged here. Our son ran in from the living room when he saw me. He hesitated, just for a second, then hugged me carefully, like he'd been coached. "You have to be gentle," she reminded him. "Mommy's still healing." I swallowed hard and kissed the top of his head. "I missed you," I whispered. "I stayed with her," he said proudly. "She reads at night." I smiled. Because that wasn't his fault. Dinner passed in polite conversation. They talked about schedules. About who would handle school drop-offs. About what would be less stressful for me. No one asked what I wanted. Later, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom. The sheets were changed. My things moved. A framed photo of our family had been replaced with something neutral. Decorative. Temporary. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just understood. This wasn't improvisation. This was a performance they'd rehearsed. And I was the only one who hadn't known the script. That night, I lay in the guest room, my room now, apparently, listening to the house settle around me. Voices murmured down the hall. Laughter. Comfort. I stared at the ceiling and felt something surprising rise in my chest. Not despair. Resolve. Because watching them pretend had shown me something important. They believed I was still too weak to notice. Too tired to push back. Too grateful to question the narrative they'd built. And that mistake. That assumption. Was going to cost them everything they thought they had quietly taken from me. The house went quiet after midnight. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, just the absence of conversation, the soft clicks of doors closing, the hum of appliances settling into their overnight rhythm. I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the faint crack of light under the door, listening to the sounds of a life that was still moving without me. Pain pulsed through my side with every breath. I pressed my palm there, grounding myself, reminding my body it was safe, even if my heart wasn't convinced yet. Sometime after 1 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My husband's voice followed, low, careful. He was on the phone again. "I know," he said quietly. "But it's almost over. We just need to be consistent." A pause. "Yes. I've already got documentation." Documentation. The word sliced through the fog in my mind. I eased myself out of bed and cracked the door open just enough to see his shadow past the hallway light. He went into the office. Closed the door. I stood there for a long moment, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I followed my instinct. The office computer was still on when I slipped inside. The screen dimmed but awake, like it had been expecting someone. I sat down slowly, my body protesting, and moved the mouse. Folders lined the desktop. Work files. Bills. And one that made my stomach drop. Parenting records. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were notes. Dates. Observations. May 12th, Elena forgot pickup. Emotional again. June 3rd, instability after argument. Child appeared unsettled. June 19th, consider alternative caregiving support. June. Weeks before the accident. I scrolled, my breath shallow. There were emails to a lawyer. Drafts, unsent but saved. Conversations about contingency planning. About ensuring continuity of care if I became unable to function reliably. I pressed a hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. This wasn't reaction. This was strategy. The accident hadn't caused this shift, it had accelerated it. Given him the justification he needed. A narrative that framed him as responsible. Prepared. Concerned. And me? Unstable. Replaceable. At the bottom of the folder was a scanned document. A preliminary custody outline. Not filed. Not yet. But ready. I closed the folder and leaned back in the chair, my body shaking, not from weakness, but from the sudden clarity that settled over me like ice. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about support. It wasn't even about her. This was about control. He had been preparing to remove me from my own life long before I started bleeding in that hospital bed. Long before I ever knew I needed to protect myself. I quietly emailed everything to myself. Every file. Every draft. Every note. Then I shut down the computer and returned to the guest room, my heart pounding, my mind eerily calm. Because now I knew. This wasn't something that happened to me. It was something done to me. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt ready. Ready to stop being the woman they spoke for. Ready to reclaim my place, not loudly, not desperately, but with truth, timing, and the kind of patience that only comes after someone underestimates you. They thought the accident had weakened me. They had no idea it had given me sight. I didn't sleep after that. Not because of the pain, though it was there, pulsing like a reminder, but because my mind had shifted into something sharper. Calmer. The kind of focus that comes when denial finally dies and leaves clarity behind. Morning arrived without ceremony. Light crept under the door, pale and hesitant. I lay still, listening to the house wake up. Cups clinking. Footsteps moving with confidence. A routine that no longer included me at its center. When I finally got up, I moved slowly, deliberately. Every step was careful. Every breath measured. I dressed in the softest clothes I owned and tied my hair back the way I used to when I needed to feel composed. At the kitchen table, my husband was already there. Coffee steaming. Laptop open. The woman sat across from him, reading something on her phone. They looked up when I entered. "Morning," she said, politely. "Morning," I replied. No tension. No confrontation. Just civility. My husband asked how I was feeling. I answered honestly but briefly. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his screen. They thought I was still passive. They were wrong. Later that morning, while my son was at school and the house was quiet, I made my first call. A lawyer. Not the dramatic kind. Not someone who promised scorched earth. I needed someone who understood custody, documentation, timelines. Someone calm. I explained everything without embellishment. The accident. The paperwork. The folder. She listened. Asked precise questions. Took notes. "You did the right thing by saving those files," she said. "Do not confront him yet." "I won't," I replied. And I meant it. Next, I called the school. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain everything. I simply stated that there had been unauthorized changes to my child's records and asked for them to be reverted immediately. They apologized. asked for documentation. I sent it. I spent the rest of the day quietly organizing evidence. Screenshots. Emails. Dates. A timeline. I labeled everything clearly, unemotionally. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. That evening, the woman approached me in the hallway. "I hope you know," she said softly, "I was just trying to help." "He said you were overwhelmed." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't smug. She wasn't cruel. She was misinformed. "I understand," I said. And I did. "But you should know, help without consent can still cause harm." Her face faltered. I walked past her without another word. Because survival, I was learning, didn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it looked like preparation. And I was no longer bleeding. I was building. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Nothing special about the day. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontation timed for maximum impact. Just an ordinary pause in the routine, one of those quiet pockets where truth fits more comfortably than chaos. My husband was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, when I sat down across from him. "I need to talk to you," I said. He looked up, already guarded. "About what?" "About the paperwork," I replied. He exhaled, leaned back. "I told you, we were just trying to manage things while you were recovering." "I know," I said calmly. That seemed to throw him. He'd been expecting resistance. Emotion. Anger. Something he could manage. I placed my phone on the table between us and slid it toward him. "I have copies," I said. "Of everything." His eyes flicked down to the screen. Just a glance, but enough. "What copies?" he asked. "The school records. The caregiver forms. The custody drafts. The notes." He didn't speak. "I sent them to myself," I continued. "And to my lawyer." "That did it." "You went to a lawyer?" he snapped. I didn't flinch. "Yes." His voice rose, frustration cracking through the composure he'd worn so easily before. "You're overreacting. You nearly died." "I had to think about our son." "So did I said. "That's why I'm here." He stood up, pacing. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly." I waited until he stopped moving. "Do you know what makes someone look unstable?" I asked quietly. He scoffed. "Here we go. Changing legal documents without consent," I said. "Creating records that misrepresent reality. Introducing another woman as a mother figure while the child's actual mother is unconscious." He froze. "I never said she was his mother," he muttered. "You let others believe it," I said. "That's enough." Silence settled between us. "I'm updating all authorizations," I continued. "Effective immediately. I'm returning to my role as primary caregiver. Any future communication about our son goes through me." "And if I don't agree?" he asked, voice low. I met his eyes. "Then this becomes something public. Legal. Documented." He stared at me, searching for weakness. He didn't find it. "You don't get to erase me quietly," I said. "Not from my life. Not from my child's." He sat down heavily. That was it. No shouting. No tears. Just truth, delivered calmly. And for the first time since the accident, I watched him realize something that terrified him. I wasn't bleeding anymore. I was standing. The change didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small moments. Quiet corrections. Gentle shifts that didn't need announcements to be real. The first afternoon I picked my son up from school again, he ran toward me without hesitation. No pause. No confusion. Just instinct. He wrapped his arms around my waist, careful of my side, like he'd been taught, and pressed his face into my sweater. "You're better," he said simply. "I'm getting there," I replied, kissing his hair. That night, I read to him. Not as a statement. Not as a reclaiming of territory. Just as a mother doing what she'd always done. His body relaxed against mine as the story unfolded, his breathing evening out before the last page. I stayed until he slept, the weight of him familiar and grounding. No one interfered. The woman began to step back. Not dramatically. Not apologetically. She stopped offering to help with routines. Stopped answering questions meant for me. She moved around the house more quietly, like someone who finally realized she'd wandered too far into someone else's life. One evening, she knocked softly on the guest room door. "I'm going to leave," she said. "I think that's best." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. I didn't know the full story. "I know," I said. That was all. My husband tried to pretend this was mutual. That it had always been temporary. That he was relieved things were settling back to normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Because I saw him clearly now. I noticed the way he measured conversations. The way he framed concern as control. The way he spoke about me instead of to me when he thought it would benefit him. And I noticed something else too. My son noticed. Children are quiet witnesses. They don't analyze motives. They feel consistency. Presence. Safety. He began asking me questions again. Small ones. Ordinary ones. The kind that means someone trusts your answers. "Can you come to my thing at school? Will you read tonight? Are you picking me up tomorrow?" Each yes stitched something back together. One night, as I tucked him in, he wrapped his arms around my neck and whispered, "I like when you're home." So did I. And in that moment, I understood something deeply. Motherhood isn't a position someone else fills when you're weak. It's a bond that survives silence, absence, even betrayal. It doesn't need defending loudly. It just needs presence. I didn't leave in a rush. There was no suitcase thrown together in anger, no slammed door meant to make a point. That kind of exit would have given him exactly what he expected: emotion, mess, something he could frame as instability. So I took my time. I waited until my body was stronger. Until I could walk without flinching. Until my son had settled back into a rhythm that didn't feel fragile anymore. I waited until the paperwork was finalized, the authorizations restored, the quiet legal boundaries drawn with steady hands. Preparation had taught me patience. One evening, after my son had fallen asleep, I packed a single box. Just essentials. Clothes. Documents. A few photographs. The things that were unquestionably mine. My husband watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his expression tight. "So this is it?" he asked. "For now," I replied. He scoffed softly. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "You're overreacting," he said, the old refrain worn thin. "Families get help. You're turning support into betrayal." I looked at him calmly. Support doesn't erase the person it's meant to help. He didn't answer. I didn't ask him to. I kissed my son goodbye that night and told him I'd see him in the morning. That nothing was changing about that. That I was still here. Because I was. I left quietly. No audience. No announcement. And for the first time, walking away didn't feel like loss. It felt like alignment. I didn't rebuild my life in a dramatic way. There were no grand declarations, no public victories that made people gasp or whisper. Healing didn't arrive with applause. It arrived slowly, in the shape of ordinary mornings and quiet evenings where my breath no longer caught in my chest when I remembered how close I'd come to disappearing. I moved into a small place not far from my son's school. Nothing fancy. Just clean, calm, and entirely mine. The first night there, I slept with the window cracked open, letting in the sound of traffic and distant voices, proof that the world was still moving, and so was I. Co-parenting was careful, polite, boundaried. I kept everything documented, everything clear. Not because I wanted conflict, but because clarity had become my language of safety. My son adjusted faster than I expected. Children do that when someone shows up consistently. When promises are kept. When love isn't conditional. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the hospital bed. The blood. The moment I realized I was alone long before I ever truly was. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt informed. What he did taught me something no one ever explains to you gently, that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it arrives disguised as concern. As efficiency. As someone else stepping in for your own good. And sometimes, survival doesn't look like fighting back loudly. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet long enough to understand what's really happening. I learned to trust myself again. My instincts. My steadiness. My right to occupy space without explanation. I learned that motherhood isn't something anyone can take from you by filling out forms or telling a convincing story while you're unconscious. It lives in presence. In truth. In showing up, even when it's hard. The scar on my side still aches when the weather changes. It reminds me of the night I almost didn't wake up. But it also reminds me of the morning I did. And when I look at my son now, safe, laughing, grounded, I know something with absolute certainty. They thought I was bleeding. They thought I was replaceable. What they never expected was that I would survive. And become a woman who could never be erased again.